Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GangstaPriest podcast. As always, I'm your host, Colby Metter, coming at you today with episode 3, where we talk about Casablanca. Before we jump into the thick of things here, there's a couple of quick orders of business I want to get out of the way. A little bit of good news at the forefront here. I've got some episodes lined up in the weeks to come here, some of the movies I want to talk about. But in about 2 weeks' time, the GangstaPriest podcast will be having its first official guest on the show, Mr. Nathan Ostrander, a good friend of mine who is another film lover. He happens to be the editor for WAND News down in Decatur, Illinois. Some of the listeners might be familiar with him. But I want to take this chance just to put out there, if you would love to be a guest on the show, I'd love to have you. There's not really any credentials necessary for a guest spot. I'm just looking for any takers. So if you're someone who loves movies, and there's maybe perhaps one you have in mind that you'd like to talk about that you think would fit in with the theme of the podcast, you can reach out to me either in the comment section below or hit me up on Facebook, shoot me a text, whatever works best for you. But I'd love to have you, and I'd like to look ahead to start scheduling guests regularly on the show. So if you are a listener and you'd like to take part in it, again, just reach out to me. We'll see what we can do, see if we can get you set up on the show. Very excited, very looking forward to having someone to kind of bounce some of these ideas off of. One other quick thing that I wanted to mention, if you have been listening to the podcast, and I've said this a few times on here, we are in the early stages. I've done a little bit of podcast work before, and in my background I've done a lot of voiceover work. I was a play-by-play announcer for a couple seasons for the women's basketball team at Olivet Nazarene University. Done some radio spots, and of course I've done acting. And so while I feel very much in my element when it comes to talking with others, editing is something that is not necessarily my forte, and currently my laptop has had a bit of a spaz out moment a couple months back, and so I'm trying to work through those issues. So I do recognize with these episodes, every now and then there's a few issues with the editing in terms of audio levels. I'm currently been shooting these podcast episodes on my phone in one take, which if you've ever worked in any sort of recording business, it's very difficult. It's nice having the functionality, being able to edit and do multiple takes. Only being able to do one take does make this quite difficult. But I do want to give you some hope that hopefully in the future, when I get my laptop corrected, things will shift over into make it a little more smoother experience for everyone. In the meantime, I want to thank you for putting up with me and as I work through these issues. But I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Continue to give me your comments and your feedback. I've already gotten some critiques from a couple people, and that is very, very helpful to me. It helps me to continue to make this thing be the best product it can be for you, the listener. So again, I want to thank you for that. As always, if you're checking me out, like, share, and subscribe. If you know the YouTube game, that does help. But most importantly, again, for you, the listeners, I just hope that you're enjoying this. And as I always say, I hope that these are able to teach you how to think, not what to think, but how to think as we take these films and pick through some of the characters and issues within. So on to today's episode. I decided to shake things up a little bit. My first 2 episodes, the films that I did on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the most recent episode, Amadeus, both came in at almost 3 hours apiece. And if you're not someone who's very versed in film, I understand that is a very, very long time to sit and watch a movie. But never fear, today, Casablanca only clocks in at 1 hour and 40 minutes. So as I always suggest, if you want, you can pause the episode here, go check the film out. If not, listen to the episode and you can decide if you want to give it a look for yourself or not. I couldn't find this one on, again, either Netflix or Hulu. But as always, most of these films you can rent on YouTube Movies. It was about $4, I believe, to rent this. And I think it's well worth it. It's a classic. Even if you've never seen the film, most of us are familiar with it with some degree. It's widely hailed as one of the greatest movies of all time. And I think for good justifications. It's an excellent, excellent film. One that, I believe this is my 3rd viewing now of it. But just as most of the movies I've been talking about on the show, every time I watch it, there's something new I can glean from it. And I think that makes it perfect for what we're going to be talking about today. So a few background notes on the film. Casablanca came out in 1942. There is a cast of characters in it, but 2 of the main protagonists of the film are played by Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, who nowadays may not be as well known of actors, but certainly for their time were stars of their era. A lot of great films that Humphrey Bogart has taken place in, and he, over the course of his work, cemented his place as one of the greatest actors of all time. And I personally think he puts out a stellar performance in this as well. Now, Casablanca, as I mentioned, is very well renowned. There's been many parodies of it over the years, references. In fact, there might even be some in your own favorite TV shows that you've never recognized. And if you watch this film, then you might be able to point out, hey, I've seen that before. Oh, so that's what they were talking about. There's a lot of quotable lines and dialogue, and the themes in it are just timeless and universal. There's good talk for it, and for good reason. Again, for it being one of the greatest films of all time. It's rare to find any negative or poor reviews of the film. There are a few out there. And what I want to do here before we, again, jump into the thick of things here is just to give a little bit of a warning on it. I never like to talk things up too much, because I think sometimes when we oversell things and we walk into things with these over expectations, if they don't quite live up to that, then we walk away with a bit of a defeated feeling. And so I want this to be something that you go in with a blank slate. If you've never seen it, I'd love for you to check it out, and for the first time, just have those initial feedback and thoughts. And so that's why I don't want to really sell it too much. It's certainly not a film for everyone. Again, the film did come out in 1942, and so it is in black and white. That is something that I recognize for some viewers is a bit difficult to sit and watch through, but I don't think that that necessarily takes away from the film. And I always encourage people, especially if you're looking to get into the enjoyment of art, the art of film, it's incredibly important to have a wide range of experiences. And just because it's a black and white movie, that doesn't necessarily impact the integrity of the film at all. And so, if that's something that's a bit off-putting, I would just challenge you to look past that, give it a try, and I really think this is going to be well worth your time. But the reason I don't want to oversell it, again, this is not a film like, say, The Avengers or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. This is not a grandiose tale. You're not going to find a film that has this incredibly deep scoring or over-the-top action. It's really, really a simple story. But as they often say, keep it simple, stupid. Sometimes it's the simple stories that are the most effective at teaching. And this is why I think Casablanca is so well enjoyed, because it is a simple story. In fact, during the course of the film, it really doesn't move too much around in sense of the setting. It mostly takes place in one main area, and that to me is just so amazing, again, how well it's done because of how little the film actually jumps around. The film has a lot of sharp dialogue. That might be something else that's something you're a bit unused to at first. A lot of the lines in this it's not these long-winded speeches. The dialogue is very sharp and witty. It's very quick. But once you sort of sit after the first 15-20 minutes, I think you get used to the pacing and rhythm of it, and then that really doesn't become anything you notice from there on out. One of the best things about this film, and I think this is true if you've ever gone to see a show on the stage, almost every character in it feels very fleshed out. There's very little stock characters. It makes for a very lively tale, a very fun tale, and it keeps you kind of engaged throughout the entire movie. The film is very reminiscent of a film noir type of film. Again, the black and white with the sharp dialogue. But again, I think for me personally, that's what makes it so enjoyable and unique, because of the sort of time frame of it. Now, the themes of the film and what we're going to look ahead to today, again, in our character studies, are timeless. And today what I specifically want to focus on is kind of a study of Rick and his relationship with Ilsa, the two main characters, because I really truly think that it can bring some great insight into the human soul. Just like the setting of the film, which takes place in sort of this upscale, swanky bar, this film, like I said, is not quite for everyone. You might watch this and think, it was okay. But for those of you who have been through tough times, or have been down your luck, or have lost a loved one, or have lost a romantic love, then I think this is going to be the perfect film for you, and this is why it resonates with so many people. It's very reminiscent, as if you were sitting at a bar and, some old song comes on that reminds you of the good old days. If you've heard the song Piano Man, there's a line, the old man says, asked, for this song to be played, and he says, "It was sad and it was sweet, and I knew it complete when I wore a younger man's clothes." And so I think for any of us who have ever reminisced upon things or have had that bit of sentimentalism, I'm telling you, I think this is something that you're really, really going to enjoy. Another thing I wrote down that might be a bit, again, if you finish it and think, it was just okay, if you can't find yourself sympathizing with Rick, which is the character we're going to be talking about here in a bit, so with what we're going to talk about in the back half of this episode, if you find yourself saying, that doesn't really interest me this much, then this film might not be for you, and that's okay. Not every film is for everyone. But if you find yourself connecting with the things we're talking about, then again, I think you're really going to enjoy this, and I think it's well worth your time. And perhaps multiple viewings might bring some insight, aside from what we hopefully talk about today, but just some insight on your own that's going to help you grow as a person. One of the other things I had written down as I watched this again today was the film has a really incredible cathartic experience. For those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar with what catharsis is, a lot of times within art, within movies or within books, the goal of the artist is to create this feeling of catharsis. It is this feeling of not necessarily dread, but pent-up emotions. When you can engage the characters in whatever you're reading or viewing, and you can sympathize with them, it creates emotions in you. When you connect with these characters, you are able to empathize with what they're going through. And good art is able to create that. And all art doesn't necessarily resolve those feelings. Sometimes you walk away and that sense of almost frustration is still within you. Not all films end on the happy ending. But it's in those moments I think they're the best, because when you read something and it's an open and shut case, you don't tend to reminisce on it or think about it too much. But when something troubles or upsets you, those are the kinds of things that cause you to begin to question your own truths and values in your life. And again, why I wrote this down as I watched this, it was almost like a roller coaster. I found myself at certain times frustrated with characters, and other times becoming okay with their decisions. And of course, the climactic ending of the film, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But it still leaves you kind of wondering some things. And it's interesting to me to ask people when they watch this how they kind of feel at the end, because I think everybody walks away with a different experience. So that's what I just wanted to talk about it up a little bit. Again, this is not a film for everybody. But for most people, especially people who have had that lost lover, again, it can connect to the character of Rick, as we talk about here in a bit. I really think this is something that you're going to enjoy. And again, is a reason why it's constantly acclaimed as one of the greatest movies of all time. Now, as always, I like to do in the episodes, I do want to give a bit of a quick plot overview. I don't want to go too much into detail on it, because that's not the goal of this podcast. But it is important to understand and know what's going on. So I'm going to kind of run through some of the bullet point synopsis of the film. The film is set in Casablanca, Monaco, during World War II. It is during this time, Germany has invaded France. They are currently occupying certain parts of it. And so as the film explains the first couple minutes, Morocco, and specifically the town of Casablanca, has become sort of a very important destination for people looking to get out of Europe, looking to get out of the country, and travel to Lisbon or travel to America. And so Morocco kind of becomes this hodgepodge of different personalities and characters. It becomes this place for refugees to escape the war and the Third Reich. And it is here, in this hodgepodge of personalities and characters, that our story is set. One of the enjoyable things that I had while watching this is the authenticity of just how real this bumbling environment feels. As you'll notice when you watch the film, there's a lot of people who come from different nationalities, different backgrounds, different values and ethic systems. And there never really seems to be this sense of tension or battle. Certainly there's a little bit of tension, but not really a sense of fighting and conflict. Everyone kind of communes together in this area, and it sort of is Morocco was a free zone. And so that's something as you watch that, again, I personally found interesting and something to think about. Now, in Morocco is a cafe or a nightclub, Rick's Cafe Americano, which is this swanky, upscale bar or nightclub run by the character of Rick Blaine. And this is where most of our story is going to take place. When I say that it's swanky, it's very reminiscent of walking into maybe a present-day casino, sort of an upscale casino. Most of the customers here at the cafe are wearing suits or very fine dresses. There is a sense of decorum and a code of ethics that kind of goes on. And it is all, the ringleader of all this, again, is the character of Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart. The first couple scenes are established or developed to establish the character of Rick and sort of the environment of the bar. But you realize right off the bat that Rick is a no-nonsense cynic of a man. He seemingly has no care for politics or personal favors or money. And he's not a cold-hearted man. I didn't really get the vibe in the beginning that he was uncaring or unkind or mean-spirited towards anybody. He's just in the middle. He doesn't seem to care about most things other than what impacts himself. And he's not portrayed as a selfish man in these opening scenes. He, in fact, is several times throughout the movie, and especially in these opening scenes as you see the people that work for him, all the people that work for him seem to be very happy and content with what he has created. And so, again, I don't think that the vibe that you get from Rick in the beginning is that he is a mean man, just that he's sort of to himself. So in these opening scenes, the drama of the story, the point of attack, or what sets the plot in motion, is Rick is working one night, and a man comes in. It's a crook named Ugarte. And he manages to get in the back room with Rick, and he boasts to Rick that he is in good fortune. You see, this man Ugarte, one of the important plot points around Morocco, again, is that it's a destination for people looking to escape the country. And there's only one way to do it. There's an airport, but in order to get out, you have to have a visa, which is very hard to obtain. And this crook's line of business is that he offers visas to people to get them out of the country. Not a rate as high as what maybe a legitimate passport would be, but at a fairly steep price. And he sees nothing wrong with it. He gets his money, he helps people out. It is what it is. But he boasts to Rick that he has come upon a couple of visas. And you learn in the opening moments of the story that there was 2 German soldiers who were carrying these visas and were killed, and they've been robbed. And so the film suggests, and it comes to find out, that this man is the one who killed them and took these passes. And the rest of the film will begin to surround around not just Rick, but these letters of transit. Now, eventually, within not too much of a time frame longer, the captain of the police force in Casablanca shows up, Captain Lourineau. This is one of the things I mentioned if you listen to the episode on Amadeus. Sometimes when you watch films, especially historical films, there's a lot going on, and it can be a bit difficult following roles and where people are from and how they kind of fit in. And you might see that, the case of that being true here. It's simple fact, and the main thing you need to learn is that the captain is the head of the police force in Casablanca. And he doesn't really play to either side. Even though he is a French officer, you'll see that he is friendly with the German officers, he's friendly with Rick. He's very, not conniving, but he sort of pulls strings to be in his own favor. He's a little bit scrupulous, doesn't really have any necessarily sense of moral code, and he kind of just does as he wills. And you'll see he and Rick's relationship, the rest of the thing, is another kind of storyline. Not something we're going to talk about today, but something that is very entertaining to see the two play off one another. And so in the early scenes, the captain comes into the bar, and he tells Rick that there's going to be 2 people arriving. There's also going to be some German soldiers arriving, and the Germans do not want specifically not one man to be leaving the country, leaving the area. And the captain seems to think that Rick, if he has the opportunity, might help them. But he warns Rick, I don't want you to do anything to help these people out. I'm trying to get in good with these German soldiers and sort of do things that are in my own best interest and yourself as well, so just stay out of it. Rick at the start asserts that, you know how I am, I'm neutral in all things, you're not going to have an issue with that here. And so eventually, first the Germans arrive, led by Captain Strasser, who becomes the main antagonist of the story. And eventually they are followed by two other people who enter the bar, Ilsa and Victor Laszlo. And Victor Laszlo is the man that the Germans want to capture. You will eventually find out that he's a very prominent figure in the movement against the Germans. He is a former Czechoslovakian citizen who manages to escape the clasp of the Germans several times, and he is a very prominent figure at trying to rally the people and lead them in revolt against the rule of the Third Reich. And so this is why the Germans want their hands on him, because they see him as a dangerous ally to that movement, and they want his energy towards that quashed. Plus, they're a bit upset that he's escaped them so many times. Ilsa, on the other hand, is not really seemingly anybody who's wanted by the Germans, but as you soon find out, she is an integral part to the story and has a very big impact on the character of Rick. So soon after they enter the bar, Ilsa sits down and she happens to notice the piano player of the bar, Sam. And Sam notices her and she calls him over, and you can tell that these two have some sort of connection in the past. And Ilsa begs Sam to play a song. A very specific song as time goes by. And Sam refuses several times. He gives several excuses. I can't remember it. Oh, it's been so long. And finally he obliges and begins to play the song for Ilsa. And it's right about that time that Rick comes out into the bar. He hears this song, and his demeanor changes immediately. He's very upset by this. He comes over to Sam, and he gets angry, and he says, I told you never to play that song ever again. And then Rick looks up, and here he sees Ilsa. And Rick freezes for a bit of a moment, and you see his face. There's a small part of him that almost lights up for a second before coming back down to reality. And so Rick sits down and begins to talk with Ilsa and Victor, which the Captain Ronald, who happens to also be at the table, notices that it's a very strange occurrence, as Rick normally has certain rules that he follows, and one of them is to not have drinks with the customers. So the fact that Rick is breaking one of his own rules, the Captain notices that something must be up. Rick must know or have some kind of connection to one of these people. Eventually you find out that Ilsa is the main reason for Rick's cynicism. Many, many years ago, and it doesn't specifically tell the exact time frame, but it's probably been a few years, as it's right before France fell under German control. Rick met Ilsa in France, and over the course of them getting to know each other, the two fell in love. Very, very madly in love. And eventually, Rick decides that he and Ilsa need to leave France. He's afraid they're going to get caught up with the Germans, and so he decides that the two of them need to leave together. And on the day that they are to leave, Sam shows up. Sam is also a good friend of Rick's from the past. Sam shows up with a note from Ilsa telling him that, I'm sorry, Rick, but I'm not coming with you. I never want to see you again. I'm sorry that it has to be this way, but it is what it is. And so Rick leaves in a train, in the rain, and thinking he will never see Ilsa again. And then here, she's happened upon his bar, and of course, of all places, Casablanca. And it's this meeting that, again, sets off the rest of the story. There's a lot that of kind of back forth in the back half of the film, and just due to time's sake, I don't want to sit and discuss all of it. But basically it becomes this sort of back and forth between Rick and Ilsa, and the struggle of his feelings for her and her feelings for him. Rick has an opportunity to help Ilsa and Victor escape, but of course he doesn't want to do that because he still harbors resentment towards her. And over the course of the film, Rick, he kind of softens up a bit. And in the end, he makes the decision to help Victor and Ilsa escape and to allow her to go on and live her life with this man who has a purpose, who has a reason. And he recognizes that even though he's probably always going to have love for her, it is what's for the best. And that's a very concise description of the back half of the film. But again, I would highly recommend that you watch it because there's a lot in those gaps there, and a lot of it is what we're going to kind of focus off here in the back half of this episode. So the character I wanted to focus on today was the character of Rick and his complexity. I've said it several times before, but the best art involves characters who are gray, who are layered, who are complex, because that's how we are. As human beings, we are the summation of everything that's ever happened to us. We are not just one single solitary thought. We are a combination of all the things we have experienced and learned and what we've gone through in life. And so it's when that complexity is written and performed on the screen, or when you, again, read it in a novel or in a book, it's those sort of things that are engaging and, again, create that sort of cathartic buildup in us that lead to those good questions we can ask. Perhaps the most famous line of the film, Rick says, "Of all the gin joints in all the towns, in all the worlds, she just had to stumble into mine." And that line kind of sets up, of course, the way that Rick feels about the situation. Here's a girl who he once would give his entire world for, turn her back on him, and now, of all things, years later, she just so happened in the huge wide world has happened to stumble into his life again. And so he's forced to deal with these feelings. And that's what happens in life. Sometimes things happen. We didn't ask for them, we didn't want them, but you are forced to confront and contend with those feelings. And again, it's outlets like this that can maybe help us pick through some of them and move forward. What I like about Rick is that, again, you notice in these opening scenes, but throughout the film, Rick is a straight shooter. And a lot of the dialogue in the film, as I mentioned, it's very short and snappy. And I often find myself wishing that some of the quick remarks that he has back, I wish I was that quick-witted. But a lot of what he says to other people, his responses to them, there's truth rooted in it, and it reveals how he feels. The beauty of someone like that, and I try to be like this in my life, but when you're dealing with someone who's a straight shooter, you know that you're not going to get a bullshit answer from them. You know this person's going to give it to you 100%. They're not going to sugarcoat anything, whether you like it or not, and that's that. And that's why I think most people gravitate towards Rick. But as these characters know that Rick is a straight shooter, they don't really know why he is the way that he is. He's sort of a mysterious man. He doesn't open up much about his past until you, the viewer, see Ilsa come into play, and that allows you a little bit of insight into why he is the way that he is. When he's a younger man and he first meets Ilsa, Rick becomes gripped by love. And love, out of almost all the emotions that we can feel and experience, is arguably the most powerful. Anyone who's listening to this, who's older, especially if you're in your 20s or older, not to say that you can't fall in love when you're teens, but when you're in your teens, you're kind of discovering emotions and maturing in those emotions. But for anyone who's, lived for a good chunk of time, love is probably one of the most powerful things that you have ever felt, and most of us have experienced it. And of course, there is hundreds upon hundreds of songs and hundreds upon hundreds, thousands upon thousands of songs and movies and books that have all been written about the concept of love. I wrote down, of course, the famous country music singer Johnny Cash and his song Ring of Fire. His lyrics, "Love is a burning thing, and it makes a fiery ring." Love is mysterious. I also wrote down Albert Einstein. He said the most beautiful thing you can experience is the mysterious. And I think love, for all of us, especially when you first experience it, is a mysterious thing. None of us can quite put our fingers on why we fall in love, why we feel that sort of way towards one person over another. And that it's a hard thing. You can't pinpoint. You can't put it in a beaker. You can't do some science and come up with that exact answer. It simply is what it is. And when you experience it, it's a very good thing. When you have it, you're very lucky and fortunate. When you don't, you are sad and left to wonder. And this goes back to why I mentioned at the start. For those of you who have never gone through the feelings of truly lost love, I don't know if you'll connect with this film as well as those who have experienced that. Love is something that is very deeply rooted in us. There's this weird sensation. And not everybody has it, but I think most of us have it. If you talk to people who are single or are going to be bachelors for their whole entire life, some of them certainly seem to have no qualms about that. They've accepted it, or it's never been an issue to begin with. But I think if you talk to most people who are getting in the back half of their life and still have not found that love, there's a sense of remorse and regret. And again, I think it's because it's something very deeply rooted in us. It's something that we all long and pine for. We want to have someone that, as they would say, is our better half, that completes us, that helps us to make sense of the world and make things feel a little less lonely. And Rick is no stranger to this. When he first meets Ilsa, he is gripped by the madness that is love. And I think one of the beauties of the film is that it's not really a superficial love. Often when you see, especially in, romantic comedies, or a lot of, romantic content nowadays, so many relationships are built on sex and the physicality and not a very good foundation, a very loose foundation. But one of the beauties of this film is, at least seemingly in the beginning, is that Rick and Ilsa's love is very, very pure. It's very innocent. It's built upon good values, and there's something very pure about it. And you could argue that in the flashback scenes where it kind of explains where Rick and Ilsa meet, it's a very, very quick scene. And so you might be a bit cynical even to that and say, well, no one can fall in love that quickly. And I understand that. But if you allow yourself to imagine that a bit more time has passed, I think it's a very believable thing. I think it's a genuine thing. And again, I think that's what makes it so pure and beautiful. And so if you've experienced that, then I think that's what's going to help you to connect with the character of Rick. But of course, the Rick we meet in the beginning of the film is not the same Rick that we meet in this flashback. And so a question that I wrote down that I want you to kind of think about a little bit today is, what is it that drives Rick to the cynicism? What truly is that motivation? Now, of course, at face value, it's Ilsa. But at the heart of that, what is the emotion, the motivation that drives him to that? And I want you to take a second and ponder that. And I'm going to explain, of course, my viewpoint here in a second, but and you may not agree with it, but that's the focus of what I want to think at as we talk for the next 10 minutes or so. I wrote down that there are two things that I think drives Rick to his cynicism and his viewpoint of the world that he finds himself in. First, neutrality, which was one of the big things of Rick, is you see him in these different scenes. He mentions that he doesn't care about politics, he doesn't care about your background, he doesn't care if people die or live or money. He's just neutral about everything. And I think the reason why he's made that one of his ideals is because after the loss of Ilsa, he was a very hurt man, and that hurt was very deeply rooted. And so I think as time progressed, he began to realize that if you don't cling to anything, if you have no connection to anything, if you just remain neutral, then there's never any fear of loss. Because when we lose, that's when we tend to feel these feelings. But if there's nothing to lose, then who cares? And so I think that's first what drives him to where he finds himself at the start of the film. Second, and perhaps more importantly, is that after his encounter with Ilsa, there's no closure to that story. If you've ever experienced someone telling a very good story and it was engaging, and then perhaps someone came in the room and interrupted the story and that person had to leave for a bit, there might be a sense of unrest in you. There's no closure to the story. You want to know what happened to these characters. And that, I think, is what's apparent here in Rick. It's a different story if Ilsa comes to him and says, I don't love you anymore, or there's another man, or she dies, all those things perhaps provide at least a sense of closure, but to just leave abruptly, to leave him standing in the rain, and to never know what the reasoning was, that is something that is far more detrimental. And I think, again, one of the more stronger reasons of why we find Rick being so much of a cynic. As always, when I watch these films, I try to take some time and look up some different articles or opinion pieces that people have wrote on the film, and one I found had a very interesting comment. One reviewer wrote that the plot is a battle for Rick's soul. And that might be a bit dramatic, but I do think there's some truth to that. As Rick struggles throughout the film with his duties to his establishment, what he's built up, and his workers, as well as struggling with feelings of, while he claims to be neutral, you do see in certain encounters there is a tinge of feeling towards the war and towards these politics, and I think a sense in his heart of what he knows is right and wrong. No matter how hard he tries to wash that away with alcohol and running away from his problems, it still remains. And then finally, of course, there is the issue of Ilsa, of trying to figure out these feelings now that she's come back into his life. Another thing I wrote down is that love is a battlefield. Of course, the song by the great Pat Benatar. Wonderful song. I am definitely a singer, and it's a great piece of art. But love really is a battlefield. And I would be willing to bet that most of the viewers have experienced this, but in battle, there are winners and there are losers. I think sometimes we live in the day and age where, everybody wants to get a trophy, and we want everybody to feel good, because we don't want anybody to feel bad. We have tried to eradicate, just like Rick in this film, we've tried to eradicate the feelings of losing, because it's not fun, by simply telling anybody, well, you participated, and that's all that really matters. And I don't necessarily think that is a very healthy mindset. I think a better mindset is to recognize that there are winners and there are losers. And this just popped in my head, but it made me think about the episode of The Office in one of the later seasons with Robert California. There's an episode where he writes down a list, and the employees of the office find it, and he's written down who he thinks are winners and who he thinks are losers. And everybody kind of obsesses over this list, and finally gets Robert to say to the entire office, winners, prove me right. Losers, prove me wrong. And I think that's perhaps a better mindset. Experiencing loss is a natural thing, but burying those feelings and trying to pretend like it didn't happen is when you're going to start having problems. I think to truly get over loss, we have to work through it and then figure out, if you don't like those feelings, how do I get better? How do I change so I don't have to feel those feelings, so I can be on the side of winning, which, of course, when you win, you feel good. You don't have any regrets. Nothing stings at you. But the same is true of this in love. Love is a battlefield, and if you've ever pursued a woman or a man, you're not always the winner. Especially in this game where usually only one person, quote-unquote, wins. Now, sometimes there's multiple people, but, typically someone's, especially in this time period of the film, when you get married, that's the one. That's the person that you traditionally stay with for the rest of your life, which, of course, is a bit different in our day and age. But I think that is relatively true. And so, it's very difficult, especially when you have multiple suitors. And you don't always win. And for those of us that have experienced that, it's a difficult thing to figure out how to work through those feelings. Especially so we don't wind up perhaps being the character of Rick, which I don't necessarily think is an entirely bad thing either. But certainly love is a battlefield. The other song lyric I wrote down is, when a heart breaks, no, it don't break even. Of course, the song Break Even by The Script, which came out, I don't know, in the early 2000s, I believe, or 2010s. But I think that's true, too, in love. When you take the risk of dating someone, there's always the risk of being hurt by it, which is the scary thing about love. And often when love doesn't work out because one party leaves it, again, a heart doesn't always break even. It's always strange to me how in these things, when people don't work out, that one person goes off and doesn't really seem to be upset by it at all, and that the other person seems to be deeply upset by it. A heart doesn't always break even. And again, love is a battlefield. There are winners and losers, and often it's the loser who's left with the pieces of a broken heart and left to figure out, how do I move forward? And so, what I love about this film is that it challenges my preconceived notions of love. I don't have, as much as I like to think I do sometimes, I think love, again, with it being mysterious, is one of those things that you can't always pinpoint or put into words how you feel, or have an exact answer for these feelings. It's often just a matter of time and things allowing themselves to work their way out. To make a biblical connection here with my life, and I put this a few weeks back up on my Facebook, but I just turned 27 now. I know many people would say, oh, Colby, you're still young. There's plenty of time. But as you begin to move forward in your life, you start to wonder, is there someone out there for me? And I've gone through all the ups and downs of love before, and There's been several women in my life that I've loved and that as I've gotten older, I thought I could see myself with a future with marrying, with a family, and building our lives together. And for one reason or another, it just hasn't worked out. And in the story of Adam and Eve, in the very beginning, Adam, of course, is by himself, and God has given him the task of naming all the animals. And so Adam is going around the garden naming all the animals. He begins to feel lonely, and he realizes that all the animals have a partner, but he himself does not have one. And in that moment, God shines upon Adam, and he forms, of course, Eve from Adam. And that kind of sets up the fundamental relationship between man and woman that, again, I think connects to that sort of restlessness in our soul, that longing for that. Is that we often feel there is that little bit of us missing. And that's not to say that a romantic partner is going to fill all the holes in your life, and I don't think that's a healthy view either. But it certainly is a very, very good thing, and it helps to give us a sense of purpose in our life and help us to not feel lonely as Adam felt and as I often feel. And so, just like Rick in this scene, and what makes him so engaging and interesting, is that he is faced with a very complex decision. Ilsa burst back into his life unexpectedly, and now he has to decide if he is going to help her or not. And in making this decision, he kind of has to set aside, to protect and preserve the authenticity of love. It can't be based on this exchange, like, well, I'll only help you if you love me, or, well, I won't help you because you don't love me. He has to kind of come to terms with making the decision apart from whether she loves him or not. And I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. I don't know why I put that in my notes right here, because I feel like that's not necessarily in line with what we're talking about, but I wrote it down, so there you go. Again, one of the downfalls of not being able to have access to software at the moment, that I can edit that out. Let's see here. Now I got to think of where I'm at. I guess just to kind of wrap this up and go off of why I mentioned that with Adam, and to kind of give my final thoughts on why, again, I wanted to talk about this. I think that I connect with Rick because he is a man who has nothing to lose, because he has seemingly lost everything when he lost Ilsa. He is a man that has been destroyed. And this is one of the downfalls of love, is that especially when you feel something as beautiful as what he had and then losing it, it's something that can eat you up from the inside. It's kind of like if you were a person, you think about, you go outside, maybe you've ever driven past a homeless city before, like a homeless tent city. But you think about it a little bit, these people are people who have been out in the cold and in the rain and the damp and the muck. And over time, that just wears on you. Whereas opposed to most of us have the safety of a house over our head and the warmth of a bed at night. And so if you were to take a homeless person and someone who had all those things and put them side by side, the two would look very, very different. And I think the same is, again, said of winners and losers in love. When you're a winner, when you have someone that loves you and things are good, those kind of things don't weigh on you. You're the person living inside the house. But like Rick, when you're someone who loses that, and again it begins to eat at you from the inside, you look just like those people that are out in the rain. You have been warped by the cruelty of time and your own emotion to where you just kind of become this figure that, again, slips into a place of, I just don't really care about anything. And again, I can experience and relate to those feelings. As I mentioned, there's been several women in my life, I would say about 3, maybe 4, if I sat down and thought over the years of women that I was just like Rick, meaning Ilsa, that when I think back on it, it reminds me much of the song that plays as time goes by. And again, sitting at that bar and reminiscing, I think about them with a sense of nostalgia and longing, and reminisce about how beautiful they were and how wonderful and miraculous and all the feelings that love brings it felt like to be with these people. And then to have to deal with them either not choosing me or rejecting me or being with someone else, those are painful things to experience. And one of the things that is a good thing of this film is that in the end, Rick does get a sense of closure. And whether you walk away from the film and you are happy with it or upset with it, at least in the end, Rick is able to talk with Ilsa and kind of figure out why she left him and where she stands, and he's able to move forward. And that's something that I wish for all of us, even if it's not a romantic, coming from a romantic foundation, like lost love. If you've lost a loved one, or if you've been spurned away by a friend, I think many of us have sat and wondered the what ifs, and they sort of haunt and plague us at night. What if I could just see them one last time? What if I could just have a conversation with them? Do they think about me? Where are they at in their life? Are they happy? These are all things that I wonder with, again, the women that I've talked about. Because it's hard for me, and again, what it feels like with Rick here, but Rick never entirely lets Ilsa go from the minute that he met her. He mentioned several times he's able to remember that day to the T, and so those feelings are still, even though they're buried in him, they're still very present. And so I can connect with that. The people that have made a lasting impact on my life and that I have these feelings of love toward, they don't just magically, like a garbage disposal, disappear from my mind. Every now and then I'll find my mind floating back to them and wondering what they're up to and how they're doing. And so it always leaves me to wonder if they ever feel the same, or if I was wasting those emotions on someone who has moved on and doesn't care at all. And so again, when you don't have that sense of closure, sometimes it stresses you out. And so one thing I want to challenge you is, if you're struggling with those feelings, and unfortunately it's not always going to happen. The film, it happens to be a chance encounter. That's why it's film. That's why it's fiction, because you can do things like that. But if you do find yourself longing over some of those things, and you do have a way to maybe reach out to that person or get a sense of closure, I would challenge you, if there's something that's bothering you, to find a way to do it. And on the other hand, if you're not able to, then I would say that learn to be okay with expressing that in different ways. And again, I know perhaps that's not, most people are going to tell you that's unhealthy. Or again, going back to the participation trophy, well, just, chin up, there's more fish in the sea. But I think part of being human is experiencing emotion and learning that it's okay. If you want to express yourself and you have these feelings, and you do it through alcohol, or you do it through becoming a bit cynical, or you do it through whatever your vice is, I think you need to learn that while you have to understand the downfalls of it, it's not necessarily an evil or wrong thing. And I think for those of us looking on the outside, don't judge someone for that, but understand where they're coming from and perhaps, commiserate with them a bit. I've always been able to find kindred spirits. It's, again, the lonely people sitting at the bar drinking, but, misery commiserates together. And so when you're with people who have experienced those things, there's a sense of kindredness, because they know where you've been, and vice versa. And so I think for me personally, that's why this film is so timeless to me, because I can watch it and go, wow, I've been there. And I can see in my life where I am at today, how some of the feelings that Rick has gone through, and again, the feelings that I've gone through, has brought me to where I'm at today. But again, to learn that there are winners, there are losers, and you have to learn to accept it and be okay with it sometimes in order to move forward. The last thing or a couple things that I wrote down here, there was a quote I put up a few weeks back, but here it is. I didn't understand then that I could hurt someone so badly that they would never recover. That a person can, just by living, damage another human being beyond repair. Unless you live in a hole in the ground somewhere, you're going to encounter a lot of people in your entire life. And you're going to have some people in your life, just like the characters of the film, that are in it for 10 minutes, a day, a week, and then you're going to have people that have a lasting impact on you. It's going to last your entire life. And you never know how you impact people. I wish that I could reach out to these women. I wish I could wonder if they still have any love for me, if they still find me as attractive as I found them, as they still wonder how I'm doing, and if those goals in my life I'm still pursuing. And again, that sense of longing for someone. And I will never know that, unfortunately. Um, but you never know the impact that you have on someone. And just like this quote says, sometimes you can hurt people. And again, with Rick in the film, it can have this lasting impact on them. And there's not really an answer to that. I'm not telling you that you have to go out and comb through all your past lovers or friendships and find answers to it. It's just how life is. But just know that just as you perhaps have been hurt by people, there's other people that maybe you've hurt yourself, and that's just simply how life is. It is what it is. You have to take it at face value. And I think the important thing of that, though, is when you can learn to accept that, then it begins to not stress you out as much. It just simply is what it is. And so, but with that, the final thought that I have is just a reminder that those emotions and that sentimentality are good. And I think it's good to be able to express yourself. People probably joke and laugh at me because I'm always putting up videos on Snapchat of me singing in the car. That's how I express myself with that. I drink. I sing. I allow myself sometimes to wallow. It is okay to have those thoughts and feelings. If you bottle it up and throw it out the window, then I think that's when you start to lose a bit of your humanity. And so it's okay to sort of have those experiences. But it's important to remember not to get completely lost in those. Have a respect for those feelings and for other people going through the same things. Sorry. Hiccup there. But be cautious about getting lost in those feelings. For all, again, the women that I've mentioned I thought I had a future with and for whatever reason don't. A couple of them are now married. Another is in a relationship. And there certainly is a bit of me that, is frustrated with that and is, it sucks because I'm not the one. But I do want to remind myself, too, to also celebrate that. Because love, that's just what's so beautiful about love. Again, there's winners and losers. And I hope that the losers can respect me in my wallowing as much as I can celebrate them in their winning. And the only thing that I can do is encourage myself, and for all of you listening that have perhaps gone through that, if you're someone listening to this episode and you're saying, man, I'm there with you. I had someone once and they're gone, and I don't know if I'll ever find someone again. Or I'm getting old. Or I don't want love anymore. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to encourage you that you're not alone. You're not alone in those feelings. And to keep your chin up and keep pressing forward, and, it'll come. And if it doesn't come, then that's okay. And if you need a drink and go to a bar and listen to Piano Man and just wallow in it a bit, call me up, because I will do it with it. I will do it with you. And for those of you listening who are married now or have found the love of your life, I congratulate you. I'm genuinely happy for you. And I hope you cherish that. And I hope you realize how precious and sacred of a thing that is. Because, again, not everybody has it. And for those that do, I think it is a treasure beyond almost all things to be valued. Not above God, but above most things. I did have a clip that I wanted to play for you guys. I'm actually going to pass on it. Just because we're getting, again, pretty lengthy here in timing. But I do want to wrap things up. Just to reiterate, as I said in the start of this, we will be having some guests starting to appear in the weeks to come. So if you are someone who would like to be a guest on the show, as if hopefully you've seen these first couple episodes, we take films, we kind of break them apart, and then talk about some of the themes upon a character and how we can apply them to our own lives. So if you're someone who likes to talk or likes film or just wants to be on the show, reach out to me. A little plug for next week, or for Friday's episode, I should say. I thought Friday we'd make it a little bit easy, a little more relaxed, take a break from some of these in-deep themes, so we're going with Old Yeller, a classic by Disney, a great story about a boy and his dog, and a coming-of-age tale. So that's going to be, if you're listening, I hope you're looking forward to that. That will be Friday's episode. And again, last but not least, if you're checking the podcast out, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Comment below. I want this to become a place for discussion and dialogue. If you had a long-lost love, if you're in love, if you're married, if you feel bad for me, again, if you're the person who wants to go drinking at the bar, if you're one of those ex-lovers who wants to let me know that, no, you don't think about me anymore, or maybe you do, reach out to me. That to me is the beauty of life, is conversation, and so I want to hear all of it. I genuinely enjoy getting to dialogue with people and to hear what's going on with your life. So, again, comment, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for checking this out. Again, I know there's some things that are a work in progress, but I personally am enjoying doing these things, and I hope that you've gotten as much enjoyment listening to these podcasts as well. So that's all we've got for today. Be sure to go check out Casablanca. You're not going to regret it. And I hope to hear you here, or hope to have you listening in on the next episode or in the episodes to come. As always, thank you for checking it out. And until next time, we'll see you then.